My relatives laughed. "Oh, look, the broke girls at the auction." I said nothing. 30 minutes later, I raised my paddle and bought the 12 million estate they came to bid on. The auction house smelled like old money and expensive perfume. I sat 3 rows from the back, holding paddle number 47, wearing a simple navy dress I'd purchased from a department store. Around me, people dripped with jewelry that could fund small countries. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across the vaulted ceiling, while waiters circulated with champagne flutes. I declined. My cousin Vanessa spotted me first. Her laugh carried across the room like breaking glass. She nudged her husband Derek, who turned to look at me with undisguised amusement. Within seconds, my Aunt Patricia had swiveled in her seat, her surgically perfected face registering shock before morphing into something closer to pity. "Oh, look. The broke girls at the auction," Vanessa announced loudly enough for the surrounding rows to hear. Several heads turned. "What are you bidding on?" "Stella, a commemorative spoon." I said nothing. My fingers remained steady on the paddle in my lap. Uncle Gerald joined the mockery next. "This isn't a charity drive, sweetheart. They don't accept coupons here." His belly shook with laughter at his own joke. Aunt Patricia touched his arm affectionately, her diamond bracelet catching the light. They'd always been like this. Every family gathering since I could remember had featured some variation of their condescension. My parents had been the poor relations, the ones who struggled while Gerald built his real estate empire, and Patricia married into pharmaceutical money. When my parents died in a car accident 7 years ago, leaving me with nothing but debt and a rented studio apartment, the family's contempt had crystallized into something almost ritualistic. Vanessa had inherited her parents' company. Her brother Timothy ran 3 luxury car dealerships across the state. Even my younger cousin Bridget, barely 25, had married a hedge fund manager and lived in a penthouse overlooking the harbor. Meanwhile, I worked as a financial analyst at a mid-sized firm, took the subway to work, and bought my clothes on sale. What they didn't know could fill volumes. The auctioneer took his position at the podium, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and rimless glasses. He welcomed everyone to the Whitmore Estate auction, explaining that today's sale would feature furnishings, artwork, and ultimately the crown jewel, the estate itself, a $12 million property spanning 47 acres, with the main house, guest cottage, stables, and private lake. Vanessa whispered something to Derek. He grinned and squeezed her knee. They'd come for the estate. I knew this because Vanessa had posted about it incessantly on social media for 3 weeks. Finally getting the house we deserve, one caption had read accompanied by a photo of her and Derek at a previous viewing. The comments from family members had been effusive. Aunt Patricia had written, "So proud of you both." Uncle Gerald had added, "About time a Whitmore lived in the Whitmore Estate again." The Whitmore Estate had originally belonged to our great-great-grandfather, built in 1887, when his timber business had made him one of the wealthiest men in the region. It had passed through various hands over the decades, and now distant cousins were selling it off. The family considered it a matter of pride that Vanessa would restore it to our bloodline. Nobody thought to ask how I'd obtained an auction paddle. The registration process had required proof of funds, a bank statement showing liquid assets sufficient to cover potential purchases. I'd submitted mine 2 weeks ago. The auction house had accepted it without question. The bidding began with smaller items. A Victorian settee went for $18,000. An oil painting by a regional artist from the 1920s sold for $32,000. Vanessa bid on a silver tea service, winning it at $7,000. She clapped her hands together delightedly, beaming at her parents. First of many treasures for the new house, Patricia called over to her daughter. Vanessa turned in her seat, looking directly at me. "You know, Stella, if you need help understanding how auctions work, I could explain it to you. I'd hate for you to accidentally bid on something you can't afford and embarrass yourself." "I appreciate the concern," I replied evenly. "I'm fine." Derek snorted. "She's probably here for the experience. See how the other half lives." My phone buzzed in my purse. A text from my attorney, Lawrence Brennan. "Everything confirmed. Wire transfer ready on your signal. Good luck." I met Lawrence 3 years ago when my company assigned me to analyze the financial health of his firm's investment portfolio. He'd been impressed enough to offer me a side consulting job. That had led to other opportunities, other clients who needed someone with a sharp eye for numbers and a sharper instinct for market trends. I built a secondary income stream that my family knew nothing about, funneling every spare dollar into investments while living in my modest apartment and shopping at discount stores. 18 months ago, I'd made a calculated risk on a tech startup that most analysts had written off. I had seen something in their business model that others had missed. The company had gone public 8 months later. My shares had been worth $40,000 when I'd purchased them. They'd sold for $4.2 million. I'd done it again with a pharmaceutical company developing a treatment for a rare disease. Another risk, another payoff. Then there had been the real estate investment trust that everyone said was overvalued. I'd studied the data, recognized the pattern, and invested heavily. 6 months later, I'd walked away with another substantial gain. My current liquid assets totaled just over $19 million. My family had no idea. They still thought I was the girl who'd shown up to Christmas dinner 2 years ago in a coat from a thrift store. The auctioneer moved through the lot list efficiently. A collection of first edition books went for $45,000. A grandfather clock sold for $12,000. Vanessa bid on several more items, losing some, winning others. Each time she won, she turned to her parents for approval, and they'd nod like royalty, acknowledging a subject's tribute. Timothy arrived late, sliding into the seat next to Gerald. He whispered something that made his father laugh. Bridget sat beside Vanessa, her engagement ring so large it seemed almost architectural. Lot 47, the auctioneer announced. A complete set of sterling silver flatware circa 1910, service for $24. Shall we start the bidding at $5,000? Vanessa raised her paddle immediately. Someone across the room countered. The price climbed to $8,000, then $9,000. Vanessa went to $10,000 and won. She actually squealed, hugging Bridget. The major pieces came next. A chandelier that had hung in the estate's ballroom went for $78,000 to a dealer in the front row. A carved mahogany staircase railing salvaged during renovations sold for $42,000. The bidding grew more intense, voices, sharper paddles rising more quickly. Aunt Patricia leaned over to Gerald. The estate should be coming up soon. Make sure Vanessa doesn't go over budget. Gerald waved dismissively. We're good for 12.5. That should be more than enough. Vanessa had been pre-approved for a loan. Her parents were co-signing. Together they'd scraped together enough for what they assumed would be a winning bid. Gerald had connections, and he'd made calls. He'd been assured that interest in the property was minimal. Most buyers were intimidated by the maintenance costs and the estate's distance from the city. $12.5 million would secure it comfortably. Lot 93, the auctioneer said, and the room fell silent. The Whitmore Estate, 47 acres comprising the main residence, guest house, stable facilities, and private lake. The property is being sold as is, with all inspections available for review. Bidding will start at $8 million. Vanessa's paddle shot up before the auctioneer had finished speaking. A man near the front raised his paddle. Then another bidder, a woman in a red dress. The price climbed to $9 million, then 9.5. Vanessa kept bidding, her face flushed with excitement. Derek had his arm around her shoulders. Patricia clasped her hands together as if in prayer. Gerald watched with the satisfied expression of a man whose plans were unfolding exactly as expected. The bidding reached $11 million. The woman in red dropped out. The man near the front went to $11.2. Vanessa countered at $11.4. The man hesitated, then shook his head. $11,400,000, the auctioneer said. Going once. Vanessa was already celebrating. Bridget hugged her. Patricia wiped at her eyes dramatically. Gerald pulled out his phone, probably to start texting people about their victory. I raised my paddle. The auctioneer's eyes found me immediately. $11,600,000 from paddle 47. The room turned. Vanessa's smile froze on her face. Derek's arm dropped from her shoulders. Patricia's mouth opened in a small O of shock. Gerald lowered his phone, slowly staring at me as if I'd materialized from thin air. Stella Vanessa's voice came out strangled. What are you doing? I didn't respond. The auctioneer looked at Vanessa expectantly. She glanced at her father, panicked. Gerald. One letter in particular caught my attention. It was from my great-great-grandfather to his son, dated 1923. In it, he wrote about the importance of building something that would last, something that couldn't be taken away by market crashes or economic downturns. Land and property are the only true wealth he'd written in careful script. Everything else is just paper promises. He'd lost most of his fortune in the depression that followed. A few years later, I knew from family stories. The estate had been sold to cover debts, but reading his words, I felt a strange connection across time. He'd understood something fundamental about wealth, about the difference between having money and building legacy. My phone rang, shattering the quiet. Lawrence Brennan. I have the inspection reports, he said without preamble. The structural engineer says the foundation is solid. Some roof work needed, obviously, and the plumbing and electrical systems are completely outdated, but nothing catastrophic. What's the estimated cost for full restoration? Conservative estimate, $4 million. If you want it done right with period-accurate materials and modern systems properly hidden, you're looking at closer to $6 or $7 million. I did the math quickly. Even at $7 million, my total investment would be under $20 million. The property would appraise for at least $25 million once restored, probably more. Let's do it right, I said. I thought you might say that. I'm sending over contact information for 3 architectural firms that specialize in historic restoration. All of them have worked on properties from this era. Interview them. See who understands your vision. The interviews took 2 weeks. The first firm wanted to modernize everything, gut the interior, and rebuild with historic inspiration. I thanked them politely and showed them out. The second firm understood preservation better, but their timeline stretched to 3 years. The third firm, led by a woman named Catherine Woodward, walked through the estate with reverence. "This is magnificent," she breathed, running her hand along the carved newel post of the main staircase. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary. Do you see this detail work? They don't make them like this anymore because no one can afford the labor hours. This is before power tools, before mass production. Every inch of this carving was done by hand." "Can you restore it?" I asked. "I can do better than restore it. I can bring it back to exactly what it was meant to be." She turned to face me, her expression intense. "But it won't be cheap and it won't be fast. We'll need master craftsmen. We'll need to source materials that aren't readily available anymore. Some things will have to be custom made using period techniques." "How long?" 18 months, possibly 2 years. And we're talking 7 to 8 million minimum. Maybe more if we run into unexpected issues, which we will. "When can you start?" Her smile was brilliant. "I'll have preliminary plans to you within 2 weeks. While Catherine worked on architectural plans, I handled the public relations disaster my family created. Vanessa had apparently told everyone she knew about being cheated out of the estate. Social media posts appeared from cousins I barely knew, painting me as vindictive and cruel. One of Gerald's business associates even called me, suggesting that I was damaging family unity. Family unity, I repeated into the phone. Interesting concept. Where was family unity when they called me the broke girl at a public auction? Where was it during every Christmas dinner where they made jokes about my clothes? Where was it when Vanessa posted my photo online with a caption mocking me for eating free food at family events? Silence on the other end. "That's what I thought," I continued. "Tell Gerald that if he wants to discuss family unity, he can start by apologizing for 2 decades of condescension. Until then, I'm not interested in his opinion of my property purchases." I hung up feeling oddly liberated. For years, I'd absorbed their mockery, quietly telling myself it didn't matter that rising above meant staying silent. But silence had only enabled their behavior. Speaking the truth plainly and without apology felt powerful. The story spread beyond family circles. A business journalist from the local newspaper contacted me, interested in doing a feature on successful female investors. I agreed to an interview, carefully controlling the narrative. I discussed my investment strategy, my analytical approach, the importance of delayed gratification. I mentioned the family estate, only briefly framing it as a sound investment in appreciating historic property. The article ran with the headline, "From Financial Analyst to Multimillionaire Local Woman's Investment Success Story." It mentioned my age, my background, my parents' deaths, and my methodical approach to building wealth. The reporter quoted me saying, "Success isn't about looking successful, it's about actually being successful. Those are very different things." Vanessa called me after the article came out. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "You're making us all look bad," she said without greeting. "I'm telling my story. If that makes you look bad, perhaps examine why. You could have at least warned us. Do you know how many people have sent me that article? How many of my friends are asking why you have more money than I do? Maybe tell them the truth, that you spent your inheritance on luxury goods and social status while I invested mine, that you assumed poverty meant stupidity, that you never bothered to look beneath the surface." "This is so typical of you," Vanessa snapped. "Always playing the victim. Always making everything about how we supposedly wronged you. Name one time I said quietly in the last 10 years that you treated me with genuine kindness. One time you invited me to something without making it clear I was charity. One time you included me without making me feel less than. She couldn't. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. The estate should have been mine, she finally said, her voice breaking. It was supposed to be mine. Why? Because you wanted it. Because you posted about it on Instagram. Wanting something doesn't make you entitled to it. Vanessa, earning it does. I earned it. I ended the call and blocked her number. There was nothing left to say. Catherine's plans arrived exactly 2 weeks later. The portfolio was 2 inches thick, containing detailed drawings, material specifications, and a comprehensive timeline. Sheets included historical photographs of the estate in its original condition, showing exactly what details needed to be restored or recreated. The attention to detail was staggering. We broke ground on the restoration in early spring. The first step involved carefully documenting everything before any work began. Photographers spent days capturing every room, every detail, every piece of original fabric or wallpaper. Anything salvageable was cataloged and preserved. Catherine had insisted on this, explaining that restoration was as much about understanding what had been as creating what would be. The kitchen renovation came first, since it required the most extensive work. Demolition revealed original brick walls that had been covered in the 1970s. We exposed them, had them cleaned and repointed, and built the new kitchen around them. State-of-the-art appliances were hidden behind custom cabinetry designed to match the 1887 aesthetic. The result looked period perfect while functioning with modern efficiency. I visited the site weekly, watching the transformation unfold. Workers stripped away layers of paint to reveal original wallpaper patterns, which Catherine's team then recreated using period techniques. Damaged plasterwork was repaired by artisans trained in traditional methods. Floor refinishing revealed wood grain that had been hidden under decades of wear. The ballroom became Catherine's obsession. She spent hours studying the original parquet pattern, creating templates to replace damaged sections. A woodworker in Vermont crafted new pieces to match the original mahogany and oak inlay. When it was finally complete and refinished, the floor looked like polished amber, the geometric pattern sharp and precise. And every time they visited, every time they saw the Whitmore Estate in its restored magnificence, they'd remember the auction. They'd remember their laughter, their mockery, their absolute certainty that I didn't belong. They'd remember the moment I raised my paddle and bought their dreams out from under them. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. I hope you're happy. I was. I really genuinely was. Not because I'd hurt her, though I couldn't deny a certain satisfaction in that, but because I'd proven something to myself that I'd always suspected. Their opinions of me had never mattered. Their mockery had been based on surface observations, on their inability to see past their own limited definitions of success. They'd measured wealth in designer handbags and luxury cars, in social media posts and country club memberships. I'd measured it in portfolio growth and strategic investments, in the quiet accumulation of actual assets rather than the loud performance of perceived status. They played a game they thought they were winning. I'd been playing a different game entirely. The weeks following the auction brought unexpected consequences. Word spread quickly through our social circles about what had happened. Several of my parents' old friends reached out people I hadn't heard from in years. They'd always known my family looked down on me, they said. They'd always thought it was wrong. Now they wanted to reconnect, to congratulate me, to tell me how proud my parents would have been. One call particularly moved me. It came from Daniel Morrison, who'd been my father's business partner before the company folded. Your dad would be over the moon, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He always said you had his head for numbers. He knew you'd do something extraordinary someday. I just wish he could have seen this. I found myself tearing up something I hadn't allowed myself to do in front of my family. Thank you for telling me that. He talked about you all the time. You know, even after the business failed, even when things were hardest, he'd say, at least Stella inherited the good sense to save her money. He saw it in you, even then. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment, looking at the few photographs I had of my parents. My mother's warm smile, my father's thoughtful expression. They'd struggled financially, but they'd never been foolish. They'd simply been unlucky, caught in an economic downturn that destroyed their business and their savings. They'd worked hard until the end, never asking Gerald or Patricia for help, despite knowing it would come with unbearable strings attached. I'd learned from watching them. I'd learned that pride was worth more than pity, that dignity mattered more than comfort. I'd also learned that financial security was the only real protection against the cruelties of people like Gerald and Patricia. Money couldn't buy happiness, perhaps, but it could buy freedom from judgment. My colleague Jennifer took me to lunch the week after the article ran. We'd worked together for 5 years, and she'd never treated me differently for my modest lifestyle. Now she looked at me with open curiosity. "I have to ask," she said, cutting into her salad, "how did you keep it secret? $19 million, and nobody at work knew." "Nobody asked," I said simply. "People see what they expect to see." I dressed modestly, drove an old car, brought lunch from home. Everyone assumed I was broke because that's what broke people do. They never considered that wealthy people might do the same things for different reasons. But why? Why not enjoy it? I did enjoy it, just not in ways that were visible. I enjoyed watching my portfolio grow. I enjoyed knowing I had security. I enjoyed the freedom of not caring what anyone thought of my clothes or my car. I paused. And honestly, Jennifer, I enjoyed knowing something nobody else knew. There's power in that. She nodded slowly. Your family must have lost their minds. That's putting it mildly. But that's the thing about assumptions. When you assume someone is less than you, you stop paying attention to evidence that contradicts that belief. They never questioned why I could afford to live in the city on an analyst's salary. They never wondered why I wasn't drowning in debt. They just saw the thrift store coat and decided they knew everything about my financial situation. "Well, for what it's worth, I think what you did was brilliant," she said. "And that estate is going to be incredible when you're finished with it." 2 months later, I stood in the main hall of the Whitmore Estate as contractors unveiled their plans for the restoration. The house had good bones. They assured me the work would be extensive but worthwhile. I'd already approved a budget that made Vanessa's $12.5 million look modest. The family gathering that Christmas was different. I hosted it at the estate even though the restoration was still underway. They came because curiosity outweighed pride and because declining an invitation would have meant admitting defeat. Gerald barely spoke to me. Patricia made awkward small talk about the weather. Vanessa avoided eye contact entirely. But Timothy approached me privately in the library, away from the others. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "We treated you terribly. I treated you terribly. You didn't deserve that." I studied him, looking for signs of manipulation or a hidden agenda. I found only genuine remorse. "Thank you for saying that. For what it's worth, I'm impressed. What you did building that kind of wealth while letting everyone think you were struggling, that takes incredible discipline and intelligence. I couldn't have done it." "You could have," I said. "You chose not to. There's a difference." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Listen, I know you probably won't believe this, but I'm glad you got the house. Vanessa would have turned it into another status symbol. You actually care about the history, the legacy. That matters." Maybe he meant it, maybe he didn't. Either way, it was more than anyone else had offered. We talked for a while about the restoration plans, and I found myself enjoying the conversation. Perhaps not all bridges had to stay burned. The estate was finished 14 months after I bought it. The restoration had exceeded every expectation. Original woodwork gleamed under new lighting. Period-appropriate wallpaper graced walls that had been carefully repaired. The ballroom chandelier, the one that had sold separately at auction, I tracked down and purchased from the dealer for triple what he paid. It hung in its original location, now crystal prisms, casting rainbow patterns across restored parquet floors. I hosted the grand opening on a Saturday in May. 300 guests walked through rooms that looked exactly as they had in 1887, with modern conveniences hidden discreetly behind period details. Historical Society members praised the accuracy of the restoration. Architectural magazines requested photo shoots. The local newspaper ran a feature story, "Local Woman Restores Family Estate to Former Glory." Vanessa came to the opening. So did Derek, Gerald, Patricia, and the rest of them. They walked through my house wearing expressions of forced politeness that couldn't quite hide their bitterness. I gave them a personal tour explaining every detail of the restoration, the challenges overcome, the historical accuracy achieved. I was kind and informative and gracious. I also made sure they saw the portrait. I commissioned it specifically for the grand opening, a life-size oil painting of me in period dress, standing in front of the estate. It hung in the main hall, impossible to miss, directly across from the original portrait of our great-great-grandfather who'd built the house. The family resemblance was unmistakable. The message was clear. This was my house, my legacy, my victory. Gerald paused in front of the portrait, staring up at it for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was defeated. You really did it. I really did. I underestimated you. You all did. He nodded slowly and walked away. I never received another mocking comment from him. Patricia stopped posting passive-aggressive social media messages. Vanessa unfriended me online entirely, which I considered a gift. The estate became my home, but also something more. I established a foundation offering financial literacy programs for young women from low-income backgrounds. I hosted workshops in the estate's library, teaching them what I'd learned about investing, about building wealth quietly, about the power of living below your means while investing above your status. Some people called it philanthropy. I called it revenge of a different sort. Every young woman I taught was another person who wouldn't judge others by their appearance, who wouldn't assume poverty meant stupidity, who wouldn't mock someone for driving an old car or shopping at discount stores. I was creating a generation who would look past the surface, who would recognize that true wealth isn't always visible. 5 years after the auction, I sold 3 acres of the estate for luxury home development. The profit margin exceeded my initial projections. My total net worth crossed $40 million. I still drove my used sedan. I still shopped sales. I still lived simply in many ways, though now I did it in a multi-million-dollar restored mansion. The family gradually adjusted to the new reality. Some, like Timothy, made genuine efforts to rebuild our relationship. Others, like Gerald and Patricia, maintained a cold distance. Vanessa and I never spoke again beyond forced pleasantries at unavoidable family events. I was fine with that. Sometimes I walked through the halls of the Whitmore Estate late at night, just me in the quiet and the house that had seen so many Whitmores before me. I thought about that day at the auction, about their laughter and their certainty and their complete misunderstanding of who I was. I thought about the moment I raised my paddle, about the look on their faces, about the satisfaction that still warmed me years later. People often ask if I regret being so cold to them, so calculating in my revenge. The answer is no. They'd spent years making sure I knew they thought I was worthless. I'd spent one afternoon proving I was priceless. That seemed like a fair exchange. The broke girl at the auction had bought more than an estate that day. She bought respect, recognition, and the undeniable proof that underestimating people based on their bank balance is the most expensive mistake you can make. And standing in my restored mansion surrounded by the legacy my great-great-grandfather had built and I had reclaimed, I considered that $12 million extremely well spent. Gerald was doing mental math, his face reddening. They'd budgeted for 12.5, but that was their absolute ceiling. Going higher would require liquid assets they didn't have immediately. $11,800,000, Vanessa said, her voice uncertain. I raised my paddle again. $12 million. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This was better entertainment than anyone had expected. The auctioneer looked positively delighted, his commission climbing with each bid. Derek grabbed Vanessa's wrist, whispering urgently. She shook her head. Patricia had turned fully around in her seat, staring at me with undisguised horror. Timothy leaned forward, trying to understand what was happening. 12.1. Vanessa called out, her voice cracking. My paddle went up. 12.5. Gerald stood up, his face purple. Now wait just a minute. Stella, this isn't funny. You can't possibly. Sir, please sit down, an auction house employee said firmly, appearing at Gerald's elbow. You're disrupting the proceedings. Gerald sat, but he looked like he wanted to commit violence. Vanessa was crying now, mascara starting to run. Derek had his head in his hands. They were tapped out. Even if they could scrape together more, it would take time they didn't have. $12,500,000, the auctioneer repeated, looking at Vanessa. Do I hear $12,700,000? Silence. Vanessa shook her head mutely. Going once at $12,500,000. The auctioneer paused. Going twice. Another pause, longer this time. Sold to paddle 47 for $12,500,000. The gavel came down with a crack that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. I stood up, smoothing my department store dress, and walked toward the front to complete the paperwork. Every eye in the room followed me. The whispers started before I'd gone 3 steps. The transaction took 40 minutes. I signed documents, authorized the wire transfer, and accepted the keys to the Whitmore Estate with the same calm I'd maintained throughout the auction. The auction house director, a woman named Caroline, kept glancing at me as if trying to reconcile my appearance with the 8-figure purchase I'd just made. "Congratulations, Miss Whitmore," she said, handing me a leather folder containing all the relevant documents. "We'll have everything transferred to your name within 5 business days. The property is yours." When I turned around, my family was waiting in the lobby. All of them. Gerald, Patricia, Vanessa, Derek, Timothy, Bridget, even a few cousins I barely recognized. They'd formed a semicircle blocking my path to the exit. "Explain yourself," Gerald demanded. "Right now." "I bought a house," I said simply. "With what money?" Patricia's voice was shrill. "You're a secretary or something. You live in a studio apartment. You shop at thrift stores. Where did you get $12 million? "I'm a financial analyst, actually," I said, and I prefer to call it strategic frugality rather than poverty. Vanessa stepped forward, her face blotchy from crying. "You did this on purpose. You knew how much this meant to me. You knew we were going to buy it." "I knew you planned to try," I corrected. "The auction was open to all qualified bidders. I qualified." But how Derek looked genuinely confused. "How do you have that kind of money?" This was the moment I'd been imagining for months. I could have been gracious. I could have been magnanimous. Instead, I let myself smile. "I've been investing quite successfully, as it turns out. While you were all posting on social media about your luxury purchases and vacation homes, I was building a portfolio. While you mocked my thrift store coats and secondhand furniture, I was making calculated risks that paid off spectacularly. While you assumed I was too stupid and too poor to ever amount to anything, I was becoming the wealthiest person in this family." The silence that followed was absolute. Gerald's face had gone from purple to an alarming shade of gray. Patricia looked like she might faint. Timothy's mouth hung open. Bridget stared at her $1,000 shoes. "You're lying," Vanessa said, but there was no conviction in her voice. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, tilting the screen so she could see the balance. Her eyes widened. She actually stumbled backward. "That's impossible," she whispered. "It's compound interest, smart investments, and living below my means while you all lived above yours." I tucked my phone away. The estate was a good investment. Historic properties in this area are appreciating at 7% annually. The land alone is worth $8 million. I plan to restore the main house and potentially develop part of the acreage for luxury homes. Preliminary estimates suggest a potential return of 18 to 22 million within 5 years. Gerald found his voice, though it came out as a rasp. "You manipulative little—" "Careful," I interrupted. "We're in public, and I have excellent legal representation. Slander is expensive." Patricia clutched Gerald's arm. "We're a family. You can't do this to family." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. Family shouldn't mock each other at every gathering. Family shouldn't call each other the broke girl or make jokes about coupons and charity drives. Family shouldn't assume that someone struggling is stupid or worthless. But you did all of those things repeatedly for years. So perhaps we have different definitions of family. Vanessa was sobbing openly now. "I wanted that house. It was supposed to be mine. It's our family legacy. Our great-great-grandfather built it." "I'm as much a descendant as you are," I said. "If anything, I have more right to it than you do. At least I can afford to maintain it." Derek tried a different approach. "Stella, be reasonable. Vanessa's had her heart set on this for months. Surely we can work something out. Name your price." "It's not for sale." "Everything's for sale," Gerald growled. "Not to you." I looked at each of them in turn. "For years, you made sure I knew my place in this family. You made it clear that I was lesser, that I didn't belong in your world of country clubs and luxury cars. You pitied me at best and mocked me at worst. Well, here's the truth. I never wanted to belong in your world. I was building my own, and mine is better." I walked past them toward the exit. Vanessa grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Please," she begged. "Please, Stella, I'll do anything." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered her Instagram post from 3 months ago, a photo of me at a family dinner, wearing my thrift store coat with a caption, "When your poor cousin crashes family events for the free food." 27 family members had liked it. Aunt Patricia had commented with a laughing emoji. I removed her hand from my arm, gently but firmly. "Enjoy bidding on the remaining lots," I said. I heard the commemorative spoons went for a reasonable price. The autumn air felt crisp and clean when I stepped outside. My phone rang immediately. "Lawrence Brennan," he said. "Congratulations on your new property." I've already been contacted by 3 architectural firms interested in the restoration project. Should I set up meetings? Please do, I said. And Lawrence makes sure they understand that I want the estate restored to its original glory. Spare no expense. I want everyone who drives past to know that a Whitmore is living there again. He chuckled. Revenge is a dish best served with a side of historical preservation. Something like that. I walked to my car, a modest sedan I'd purchased used 3 years ago. I kept driving it. I decided there was something satisfying about maintaining the illusion of modesty while sitting on a fortune. Let them wonder, let them calculate, let them realize slowly over months and years exactly how wrong they'd been about me. The estate's restoration would take time. I'd hire the best contractors, source period-appropriate materials, and document everything. I'd host a grand opening, when it was finished, invite the entire family, and watch them walk through rooms they'd assumed would belong to Vanessa. I'd be gracious and welcoming, the perfect hostess in my ancestral home. The first viewing of the property happened 3 days after the auction. I drove out alone in the early morning mist, still clinging to the lake surface. The gate had rusted slightly, but the iron scrollwork still bore our family crest. I pushed it open and followed the long gravel drive up to the main house. Seeing it in person, truly mine, felt different than I'd anticipated. The photographs hadn't captured the way morning light hit the eastern windows, or how the old oak trees formed a natural canopy over the approach. The house itself stood 3 stories tall, built from local limestone that had weathered to a soft cream color. Ivy climbed the western wall, and several shutters hung at odd angles, but the structure remained sound. I walked through every room that first day, taking notes and photographs. The ballroom on the second floor still had its original parquet flooring, though it needed refinishing. Water damage had affected one corner of the library, but the built-in bookshelves were salvageable. The kitchen was a disaster from the 1970s, an unfortunate renovation that would need complete removal, but the bones were there hidden under decades of poor decisions and deferred maintenance. In the attic, I found boxes of old photographs and documents, bills of sale from the 1890s, letters between family members, a journal belonging to my great-great-grandmother describing her first impressions of the house as a new bride. I sat on the dusty floor reading until the light faded. One letter in particular caught my attention. It was from my great-great-grandfather to his son, dated 1923. In it, he wrote about the importance of building something that would last, something that couldn't be taken away by market crashes or economic downturns. Land and property are the only true wealth he'd written in careful script. Everything else is just paper promises. He'd lost most of his fortune in the Depression that followed a few years later. I knew from family stories. The estate had been sold to cover debts. But reading his words, I felt a strange connection across time. He'd understood something fundamental about wealth, about the difference between having money and building legacy. 5 years after the auction, I sold 3 acres of the estate for luxury home development. The profit margin exceeded my initial projections. My total net worth crossed $40 million. I still drove my used sedan. I still shopped sales. I still lived simply in many ways, though. Now I did it in a multi-million-dollar restored mansion. The family gradually adjusted to the new reality. Some, like Timothy, made genuine efforts to rebuild our relationship. Others, like Gerald and Patricia, maintained a cold distance. Vanessa and I never spoke again, beyond forced pleasantries at unavoidable family events. I was fine with that. Sometimes I walked through the halls of the Whitmore Estate late at night, just me in the quiet, and the house that had seen so many Whitmores before me. I thought about that day at the auction, about their laughter and their certainty and their complete misunderstanding of who I was. I thought about the moment I raised my paddle, about the look on their faces, about the satisfaction that still warmed me years later. People often ask if I regret being so cold to them, so calculating in my revenge. The answer is no. They'd spent years making sure I knew they thought I was worthless. I'd spent one afternoon proving I was priceless. That seemed like a fair exchange. The broke girl at the auction had bought more than an estate that day. She bought respect, recognition, and the undeniable proof that underestimating people based on their bank balance is the most expensive mistake you can make. And standing in my restored mansion, surrounded by the legacy my great-great-grandfather had built and I had reclaimed, I considered that $12 million extremely well spent.